The rain had stopped just before sunset, leaving the bar's wooden deck slick and glistening beneath the soft amber glow of its lamps. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of spilled whiskey and fried food, the low hum of chatter weaving through the faint melody of an old jukebox. At a corner table, she sat quietly, fingers curled around a chipped coffee mug like it held her steady in a world that still spun faster than she could catch. Her name was Claire Monroe, though few here knew it. To them, she was just the woman who came in twice a week, dressed in a plain white shirt and worn jeans, never lingering long enough for questions. They didn't see the calluses that lined her palms like old battle maps. They didn't hear the echo of rotors in her memory, or the laughter of voices she could never hear again. To them, she was simple, unassuming, just another face. But beneath that shirt, ink told a different story. Across her chest stretched an emblem, the bold wings of the United States Marine Corps, etched in deep black and crimson, each line drawn with memory and pain. It wasn't for show. It was a tribute carved in permanence, a vow she carried when no one else could. Claire had learned early that strength was not loud. It was quiet, steady, a whisper in the chaos of war. At 19, she signed her name, traded textbooks for boots, and stepped into a life that carved her down to bone before building her back stronger. She had seen deserts swallow daylight whole, heard the crack of rifles splitting silence in places that smelled of sand and sweat. There were nights the stars looked like bullet holes in a dark sky, and mornings that tasted of iron and ash. Yet nothing tested her like coming home. The transition was a different kind of battlefield, quieter, crueler. In the field, danger was clear, enemies named. Back home, the fight was invisible. Bills piled like barricades. Sleep came fractured, shrapnel lodged deep in her dreams. People thanked her for her service with eyes that never met her scars, as if their gratitude could mend what the years had splintered. She smiled through it all, but in the stillness, she carried the weight alone. Always alone. That night, the bar was louder than usual. A group of bikers had taken over the center tables, their laughter rolling like thunder across the room. Claire felt their presence before she saw them, voices sharp, boots heavy against the old wooden floor. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the lukewarm coffee in her hands, the way the steam curled upward and vanished like ghosts. But then came the sound of chairs scraping, laughter turning jagged. A shadow fell across her table. "Hey, sweetheart." The voice was gravel wrapped in whiskey. "Sitting here all quiet, looking too good to be alone." Claire looked up, her hazel eyes steady, unflinching. The man towering over her was massive, arms inked with flames and skulls, leather vest stretched tight over his chest. His beard framed a grin that spoke of trouble, the kind that swaggered in without asking permission. She didn't answer, just took another sip, the bitterness coating her tongue like a shield. The biker chuckled, leaning closer, the scent of beer heavy on his breath. "Come on, don't play shy. Bet you're hiding something under that shirt." Around them, the bar hushed. Conversations faltered, glasses stilled midair. Claire felt the shift like a tide pulling back, the weight of eyes pressing against her skin. She set her mug down gently, her movements deliberate, like a soldier placing a weapon on safe. "Walk away," she said softly, but her voice carried steel. The biker laughed, loud and sharp, echoing off the walls. "Or what? You gonna stop me?" And then, with a suddenness that stole the air from the room, his hand shot out, gripping her collar. The fabric strained, buttons clattering against the floor like fallen coins. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the shirt tore open, not just fabric, but the illusion of simplicity. There it was, the tattoo, bold and unyielding, the eagle, globe, and anchor etched deep into her skin. Beneath it, the words Semper Fidelis, always faithful, arching across her heart like a banner. The biker froze. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. Even the jukebox seemed to fall silent. The bar wasn't looking at a victim anymore. They were looking at a Marine. Claire rose slowly, the torn fabric falling to her sides like shed skin. Her eyes met his calm, unwavering, a storm held in quiet restraint. "You were saying?" Her voice was soft, almost kind, but there was a weight to it that pinned him where he stood. He stepped back without a word, swallowed by the silence he had created. And in that silence, something shifted, not just in the bar, but in the way they would all remember her. The night air outside the bar carried the faint scent of rain and asphalt, cool against Claire's flushed skin. She stepped out slowly, torn shirt gathered in her hands, boots crunching on the gravel lot like distant echoes of another life. Behind her, the murmurs faded, leaving only the hum of neon and the whisper of wind. Moments like this, moments that stripped her down to the core, always left a trail in her chest, a hollow place where old battles stirred awake. She walked toward her truck, the same faded Chevy that had carried her through countless back roads since she came home. Its paint was chipped, the color dulled by years of sun, but it was steady, reliable, unlike the world she returned to. With a soft sigh, she slid behind the wheel, the leather seat cold against her back. For a long while, she didn't turn the key. She just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, feeling its grooves under her calloused palms. Her breath came slow, measured, the way they'd taught her, control the rhythm, control the storm. But the storm had a way of finding cracks. She saw it again, the biker's hand, the ripping fabric, the sharp gasps around her. And then, beneath it all, something older. The dust-colored horizon of a desert half a world away. The weight of a rifle slung across her chest. The taste of grit and adrenaline. Her heartbeat quickened, syncing with phantom rotors thundering overhead. For a second, she wasn't in her truck. She was back there, in that brittle heat, boots sinking into sand that burned like fire. The air smelled of cordite and diesel. Voices shouted over radio static, clipped and urgent. Then came the sound, deep, ripping, the kind that tears silence apart before you even understand what's happening. She closed her eyes hard, nails biting into her palms. Breathe. Count. 4 in, hold, 6 out. Again. Slowly, the present returned. The muted glow of the dashboard, the low hiss of wind sneaking through the cracked window. Her body loosened by degrees, but the memory clung like smoke, curling in places no hand could reach. The truth was, coming home hadn't been a homecoming. It was landing in a world that felt like foreign soil, only without the uniform to explain why you never quite fit. People smiled at her in grocery stores, offered thanks that felt like small talk with polished edges. They didn't see the nights she woke drenched in sweat, or the way she kept a lamp burning just to push the dark back a little farther. They didn't know about the appointments, lined chairs, antiseptic air, the words adjustment disorder written in neat black letters across a folder. Claire had nodded when they said it, as if naming it could make it smaller. It never did. The hardest part wasn't the noise. It was the quiet, the kind that stretched long after midnight, when the world went soft and still, and every face you lost came walking back. She learned to fill that silence, at first with liquor, then with miles of empty road, and finally with ink. The tattoo wasn't vanity. It was survival, a way to keep her story where she could see it, feel it, touch proof that it all happened and that she was still here. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her, dragging her back. A message from Elena, the only friend who still called, though the calls came fewer now. "You okay?" 2 words, light on the screen but heavy in meaning. Claire stared at them for a long time, thumb hovering. She typed back, "Yeah." Just that. She didn't add the truth, that her chest still felt raw where the shirt had torn, that her mind was a battlefield without borders. No one needed to carry that weight. It was hers alone. Turning the key, the engine rumbled awake, steady and familiar. She pulled onto the empty road, headlights slicing through the dark like clean edges. The town blurred past, sleepy storefronts, streetlights flickering like tired sentries, until there was nothing but open stretch and sky. The moon hung low, pale and patient, watching as she drove with windows down, letting the cool air braid through her hair. As miles slipped beneath her wheels, something inside eased, not gone, never gone, but quieter. Claire had learned to live with ghosts, to make room for them without letting them choke the light out of her days. That night reminded her why she carried her truth inked across her skin. It wasn't a shock. It wasn't for pride. It was a shield, and sometimes a mirror for those who needed to see what strength really looked like. When she finally pulled into her driveway, dawn was just a rumor on the horizon. She sat for a moment longer, staring at the dim outline of her porch, the worn welcome mat curling at its edges. In the stillness, her reflection glimmered faintly in the rear view, tired eyes, wind-tossed hair, a tear at the edge of her shirt revealing a sliver of the emblem beneath. Always faithful, to the core, to her brothers and sisters, to herself. She whispered it once, softly, like a prayer she still believed in. Morning broke with a pale, reluctant light, the kind that softened sharp edges but never fully warmed the air. Claire sat on the porch steps, a chipped mug cradled in her hands, steam curling upward in fragile tendrils. The torn shirt from last night hung on the back of a chair, the fabric split like a scar, a reminder that some wounds come without blood. She sipped the bitter coffee slowly, watching the first slant of sunlight stretch across her yard. The stillness should have felt like peace, but her mind churned, replaying every second of the night before. The laughter, the tearing sound, the sudden hush that followed. She could still feel their eyes on her, could still see the biker's face when the truth branded itself across his gaze. For a long time, she had lived under the comfort of being invisible. Now, that veil had burned away, and she wasn't sure what was left in its place. Her phone buzzed against the porch rail. A text from an unfamiliar number. "You didn't deserve that. Just wanted to say thank you. For what you've done. For who you are." No name. Just words, standing bare on the screen like open palms. Claire stared at them, the morning quiet pressing against her ears. Something inside her shifted, small but undeniable, a ripple across waters she thought had gone still forever. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she let the message sit there, glowing faintly like a tiny ember in the gray light. Later that day, she drove out past the edge of town, where the land opened like a breath and the sky stretched wide enough to hold every secret she had carried home. The old trailhead waited, a narrow path winding between skeletal pines, their branches clicking softly in the wind. She hadn't been here in months, maybe longer. Claire stepped out, gravel crunching under her boots, and for a moment she just stood there, feeling the air press cool against her skin. Then she walked. Each step loosened something, a knot in her shoulders, a weight in her chest. The scent of pine needles rose sharp and clean, mingling with a faint musk of damp earth. Somewhere above, a hawk called, its cry slicing through the stillness like a blade of light. Halfway up the ridge, she paused. Her breath came in steady pulls now, lungs stretching, heart drumming not from panic this time, but from effort. Progress. She closed her eyes, letting the wind braid through her hair, listening to the soft percussion of leaves underfoot. And then, memory, as sudden as lightning. A voice over the comms, calm but clipped. "Monroe, we need eyes on the ridge. Now." She could almost feel the weight of her pack, the grit grinding between her teeth, the metallic tang of fear tucked under her tongue like a secret. Back then, she didn't have the luxury of stopping. There was no room for stillness when the air itself could split with fire. But here she could stop. She could breathe. And she did. She sank onto a flat rock, tracing its rough edges with her fingers, grounding herself in the texture of now. The past would always live inside her, stitched into her bones, inked into her skin, but it didn't own every breath she took. Not anymore. As the sky deepened into gold, Claire rose and turned back down the trail, her steps lighter than before. By the time she reached her truck, the sun was spilling fire across the horizon, setting the world ablaze without burning it down. Night found her back on the porch, the air humming with crickets, the scent of rain lingering like a half-forgotten song. She opened her phone again, scrolling to that message. Her thumb hovered for a moment before she typed. "Who is this?" Seconds later, the reply came. Name's Jack. I was there last night. Marine, 2nd Battalion. Got out in '09.
Saw your ink.
Figured we might understand some of the same ghosts. Claire read it twice, the words sinking deep, stirring something long dormant. For so long, she had carried the weight in silence, convinced no one could truly see her anymore. And now, this. A voice reaching across the dark, not to fix her, not to pry, but simply to say, "You're not alone." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set the phone down and leaned back, eyes tracing the scatter of stars across the black velvet sky. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel hostile. It felt like space, wide enough to hold new beginnings. Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. Not because the war was over, it never truly ended, but because tonight, for the first time, it felt like maybe she didn't have to fight it alone. And that, she thought, might just be the start of coming home. The days grew longer, the sun stretching its arms wider across the earth as spring settled in. Claire stood in her backyard beneath a sky brushed in soft watercolor hues, lavender melting into rose, gold burning gently at the edges. The air smelled of rain-soaked soil and blooming magnolias, scents she had once thought she'd never notice again. She set her hands on the worn wooden rail of the deck, the grain rough beneath her fingertips. Beyond it, the land rolled out in muted greens, stitched with shadows that whispered of dusk. It was quiet, save for the steady hum of cicadas and the distant low of a tractor somewhere far across the fields. A peaceful quiet, this time. Not the suffocating kind that used to make her chest seize like a closing fist. On the small table beside her sat a phone, its screen dark but heavy with meaning. Jack's name was there now, not just a number. They had spoken twice since that night, not long conversations, nothing dramatic, just words that felt like open windows in a room too long sealed. He understood the language, she didn't have to speak. The pauses, the sharp edges dulled by time but never gone. And it wasn't about him fixing anything. It was about knowing that someone else had walked through the same fires and come out the other side with scars that glowed under the same moonlight. Claire exhaled slowly, watching her breath fade like a soft ghost against the fading light. She thought about the years that had folded in on themselves, tight and airless, about the nights she'd sat on that porch feeling like her body was back, but her soul was still adrift over deserts and mountains. The ache wasn't gone, not entirely. Maybe it never would be. But it didn't hollow her out the way it used to. Now it felt like a weight she could set down sometimes, if only for a while. She reached for the mug of tea, its warmth pooling through her palms. As she lifted it, her eyes caught the faint edge of ink peeking from her collar. Bold, unyielding, carrying the stories that still lived in her bones. For years, that tattoo had been armor, proof of battles fought and survived. Tonight it felt like something more. A bridge, maybe. A thread tying her not just to the past, but to every soul who had carried a rifle in sandstorms, who had lain awake listening for ghosts in the quiet. Her phone buzzed, a single message lighting up the screen. Campfire at my place tomorrow. Few of us from the old days. You should come. No pressure. She smiled, small, almost hesitant, but real. Her thumb hovered over the keys, then typed, "Maybe I will." The sky deepened, stars spilling slowly across the dark like fragments of broken glass made holy. Claire sank into the old wooden chair, letting its creak blend with the soft chorus of night. She thought about the young woman who had boarded a plane at 19, all steel and resolve, believing courage was the absence of fear. She thought about the woman who had come back years later, carrying pieces of herself she didn't know how to fit together. And now she thought about the truth she had learned in the spaces between those years. Courage wasn't about being unbroken. It was about showing up, again and again, even when your hands shook and your heart carried fault lines. It was about finding light, sometimes in the smallest of places, and choosing to let it in. Claire tilted her head back, eyes tracing constellations she couldn't name, and whispered the words she had carried across battlefields, through lonely nights, through every dark corner of herself. Always faithful. To her country, yes. To those she had lost, always. But tonight it meant something else, something quieter, something harder. Always faithful to the promise of beginning again. The fire crackled softly, sending thin spirals of smoke into a night sky freckled with stars. The campfire's glow carved warm halos against the dark, painting faces in shifting shades of amber and gold. Claire stood at the edge of the clearing for a moment, hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket, heart thrumming like distant drums. Laughter drifted across the circle, low, unguarded, the kind that belonged to people who understood the weight of silence. A half-dozen figures sat around the flames, their boots planted firm in the soil, their voices rising and falling like an old song only they remembered. For a moment, Claire considered turning back. The old instinct clawed at her, stay invisible, stay safe. But then she saw Jack. He looked up from where he sat, a beer balanced in one hand, the firelight catching in his eyes like a reflection of something steady. He didn't wave, didn't call her name, just offered a small nod, a quiet gesture that said, "You're welcome here." No explanations needed. Claire's breath eased out slow, the tension loosening by degrees. She walked forward, gravel crunching under her boots, each step pulling her out of the shadow and into the circle of light. Someone shifted over on a log, making space without question. "Glad you made it," Jack said as she settled in. His voice carried a softness that didn't need embellishment. "Me too," she replied, though part of her still wasn't sure what had brought her here. Maybe it was the promise of warmth, of something human beyond the quiet walls of her house. The fire snapped, a log collapsing inward with a shower of sparks. Around it, stories spilled like water from a deep well. Men and women with lines etched in their faces like topographies of survival spoke in fragments, in shorthand only they understood. Names of places that tasted like dust, jokes laced with shadows, silences heavy with things that didn't need saying. Claire listened at first, letting their voices wash over her like a tide pulling at a shoreline. Then, without planning to, she found herself speaking. It started small, a memory of a convoy under a sun so bright it burned color out of the world, of laughter over MREs that tasted like cardboard but felt like communion. The words came slow, like stones pried from the earth, and then faster, until she was telling them about the ridge, about the night the sky turned to fire and the ground shook like a beast waking. She didn't look at their faces while she spoke. She looked at the flames, at the way they consumed wood without hesitation, at the embers rising like ghosts set free. When her voice faltered, no one rushed to fill the gap. They just let the silence breathe, soft, respectful, a space wide enough to hold everything she had laid down. Jack nodded once, the smallest motion, but it anchored her like a rope thrown across a chasm. Someone passed her a bottle. She took a sip, the taste sharp and warm as it slid down her throat. For the first time in years, the burn didn't feel like punishment. It felt like belonging. Hours slipped by in a rhythm older than clocks, the hiss of logs collapsing into ash, the murmur of voices threading through the dark, the occasional burst of laughter sparking like kindling. The night stretched, but Claire didn't feel the weight of it pressing down. If anything, it lifted her, inch by inch, until the air in her lungs felt different, cleaner somehow. When the fire burned low, just a bed of glowing embers, Claire rose. The others were still talking in hushed tones, faces drowsy with fatigue and the soft ache of memory. Jack stood, too, brushing ash from his hands. "Long drive?" he asked. "Not too bad," she said, pulling her jacket tighter as a cool wind slid across the clearing. He hesitated, then offered, "These nights, we do them pretty often. You should come back." Claire met his eyes, saw nothing there but quiet truth. She thought about the years she had spent folding into herself, building walls out of silence and fear. Thought about the weight of ghosts and how, tonight, they felt a little lighter, like maybe they could walk beside her instead of on her back. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I will." Jack smiled, brief but real, and for a moment it felt like the simplest thing in the world. As Claire drove home under a sky wide enough to swallow every sorrow, she felt the hum of the engine steady beneath her palms, the road stretching like a promise. The night was still dark, but something glowed inside her, a small ember refusing to die, a whisper of warmth against the long cold. She didn't call it healing.
Not yet.
But it was hope. And for the first time in a long time that felt like enough.